All right, so we are looking at watercolor techniques here. Before you even start, you are going to want to set up your workspace. So you need your paper, obviously. You need your brushes and your watercolor paint that were in your bag for you. You are going to want to have a paper towel, a small cup of water. Don't fill it the whole way full. You don't need that much water, and you're probably just more likely to spill it all over the place. And you also need a place to mix your paint. So at school, we have white, like shiny laminated tables. We could mix right on our tabletop here at school. If you are doing this at home, you are not gonna wanna mix on your kitchen table, your counter, anything like that, because the paint could stain and you don't want all that moisture on like a wooden tabletop. But also, you're not gonna be able to see your paint that you're mixing, like the color that you're mixing, if you're mixing it on top of brown, gray, whatever. So there are a couple options that you have if you're at home. Option number one, you could get a piece of wax paper and take a scrap piece of white paper that you have, put it underneath so that your surface is now white and it's shiny, and you could mix on top of that wax paper. Second option, you can get, if you have like one of these little like binder, like paper holder things, hanging out, you could just put a scrap piece of white paper in it, and now that's shiny and you could wipe it off and it's white. If you have a little binder like a divider and you got one that's clear or that's white, you don't want to use a color again, but you could use that as well. You could also slide a piece of white paper inside a clear gallon Ziploc bag. You could do that. If you have a styrofoam white plate, you could do that as well. So you have some options here. Just want to make sure that you're painting on something that's waterproof and that is also white. All right, so I'm right-handed, so all of my stuff is set up on the right side of my paper. Obviously, if you're a lefty, you're gonna wanna set your stuff up on the left. So if you need a moment to pause this video, go set yourself up, get what you need, and then come back, you might wanna do that. All right, so we have a couple different brushes included here. I can't remember if I gave you guys 2 or 3, I don't know, but there should be a variety in your envelope. You will probably have like a smaller one and then maybe 1 or 2 big ones. I'm actually gonna paint with a bigger one here to start for these first few different techniques. The detail brush is pretty tiny and you're not gonna be able to cover a big area with that. So I've given you 3 different colors. I've given you blue, red, and yellow. Those are the 3 primary colors. And you can mix any color from these colors. So as I'm going here for this first part, you don't need to use the same color as me. It's completely up to you. So to begin with watercolor paint, you're gonna wanna moisten your brush. You're never gonna dip a dry brush into these paints because they need water added to them. So moisten your brush, and I like to start by putting a little puddle of water on my painting surface here. So it's about the size of a quarter. I'm not creating a lake on my table. And I can, with my wet brush, gently go over my paint, and I'm gonna add it to that little puddle of water that I've created. You're not digging into this paint. It's not thick, shiny paint like acrylic paint. Watercolor paint is meant to be watered down. It's meant to go on with a matte finish, if you will. Like, it's not shiny, it's not glossy. That's acrylic paint. You want it to be transparent. So you wanna add it to water always. I'm never scooping the paint out of here and going directly to my paper. I'm always adding it to a little bit of water first, and then I'm putting it on. I might even add a little bit more water to this, depending on how transparent I want it to be. All right, so the first technique here is a wash, and this is a very common watercolor technique. There are a lot more techniques than this that are pretty standard, but we're just gonna do a couple here. So a wash is solid, it's transparent, it's watery. So I have my bigger brush, and I'm putting the paint in this box, and you can see the water is absorbing into this super crappy copy paper here, and you're like, ooh, that looks bad. Yeah, this is not watercolor paper. I've included really nice watercolor paper for you for the actual project, but since this is just practice, like, you know, we don't need nice paper for this. All right, the next one is a bleed, and that's when two wet colors touch each other. So this is often people's kind of gripe with watercolor, the thing that they like the least about it, but it's also one of the most fun things about watercolor. So a bleed and two wet colors touching each other, you kind of have to work fast here. Ooh. You can see my red just totally went into my blue. Maybe I'll add a little bit more blue right here. Add a little bit more red here. I don't know, you can kind of play around with it. Try to get those two colors to bleed into each other. So I'll get this a little bit closer here so you can kind of see all my colors are starting to like meld into each other. And that happens when your colors aren't dry, obviously. So if you were painting two things that were like really, really close to each other, you would want to paint color number one, let that fully dry, and then go back to paint color number two, because otherwise you're gonna get a bleed. All right, so I gave you a couple of different types of brushes, some bigger, maybe one smaller. So the bigger brushes that are round at the end or flat, or maybe yours has an angle or something, this is a spot to just play around with that brush. I'm gonna make purple. Kind of get rid of these colors here. See how close you can paint together, how thin of a line you can make, what each of these brushes look like, how wide they are. Oops, sorry, I hit my camera stand there. The really teeny tiny brush you have. Now kind of see what that does. How close you can get your lines in there. I don't know, you're just playing around. All right, so at this point, my table is pretty crappy looking. I need some space to mix more colors. So I'm gonna take my paper towel, I'm gonna wipe this up, and my water is, it's looking okay. I'm probably gonna change it here in a little bit. So this little scale here is a tint. I want you to practice making a little value scale with tints. So you don't use white paint with watercolors. A color is lighter because it is more watered down and you see more paper through the paint. So we have pure color here, color that's pretty solid, vibrant, and then I want you to add more water, more water, more water until you get to white. So I'm gonna make mine blue. You can make yours whatever color you want. And that's pretty vibrant. Again, this is about the size of like a nickel, a quarter. I don't have a ton of paint here on my table. So I'm gonna paint with pure color here. This is also an exercise in brush control. Pick a brush that's an appropriate size to paint this box. Try not to go outside of the lines. All right, now we have a little bit more water added. So I'm just gonna take my wet brush, has quite a bit of water on it, and I'm gonna add some water to this paint. So you can see it's just a little bit lighter there. And when I go to put it in the box, what do we know about two wet colors touching each other? They're gonna make a bleed. So when I add this, I'm actually gonna leave a really teeny sliver of white space between my two colors, so that way they're not gonna bleed into each other. All right, I have even more water added now, and you can see I'm adding more water to my little like puddle here, so I knew it was gonna grow. That's why I started off pretty small. Again, I'm leaving that little white space here. And then this one is just, ooh, goodness, gonna knock my water over. Just barely there. Blue, probably isn't even picking up on the camera, it's so light. And then we have white. So pure color, very bright, vibrant, add a little bit more water. And this paint will look a little bit better once the water has dried. You can see this wash already looks a lot better because the paper is starting to be dry. All right, a shade is the next one here, but we did not give you black. So a shade is adding black to a color. So, whoop, we don't need to do it. Don't worry about it. If you have watercolor paint at home and that's something that you want to experiment with, go for it. You don't need to. Instead of a shade, I'm actually going to show you two different techniques since we have a little bit of space here. The first one is a drip. So I'm just going to add some red to this, make a little bit of red violet, and I'm going to try to drip it down my page. So I'm kind of holding the page up like this so it's standing up, and I'm gonna like just tap my paintbrush here at the edge, and I'm gonna shake it a little bit. I'm gonna add a little bit more water. You kind of have to like coax them into it a little bit. There we go. And if I shake it water in there, and then I get like a drip going. So you could play around with the drip. The other one I want to show you really quickly, since we have a little bit of space here, is a splatter. So when you think of splatter, you might think of someone like whipping the paintbrush like this. Sure, you can splatter that way. You can splatter paint that way, but that's going to make a massive mess. So two different ways that you can make a splatter. Option number one, I mean, my brush is pretty wet here with my red violet. You can hold your finger and you could tap it over your finger, and so you get a splatter. Or you can grab the bristles and flick them, and that makes a little bit of a tighter splatter. Maybe I shouldn't have made this red. Now it looks like I have blood splatter all over my paper. And this is a very controlled splatter. You could see it's really just in the area that I'm trying to splatter. It's not like across the page. I've not whipped it across the room here. All right, so this is video one for this top section. I'll do a second video for the bottom.